My son-in-law didn't ask, he announced. That's the part I keep coming back to, even now. Not the audacity of what he wanted. Because, honestly, I've seen enough of life to know that people will push as far as you let them. What still sits wrong with me, like a splinter you can't quite reach, is the way he said it. Casual. Almost bored. Like he was telling me the weather forecast, not informing me that my home, my retirement, my sanctuary, the place I'd spent 31 years working toward, was about to become a group living situation. I'm 58 years old. I spent 3 decades working in commercial insurance up in Edmonton, most of it good years, some of it grinding, all of it purposeful. My wife, Catherine, passed 6 years ago, breast cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by October. 7 months, and then a quiet that I still haven't completely gotten used to. After she died, I stayed in the city for 2 more years out of habit, or maybe stubbornness, and then one morning I woke up and thought, what am I doing here? So I sold the house in Glenora, the one Catherine and I had renovated twice, the one with the garden she kept so carefully, and I bought a place on Lake Wabamun, about an hour west of the city. A proper house, not a cabin. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound deck, a dock I built myself over 2 summers. The lake freezes in winter, and I've learned to love that too. The silence is different when the ice is thick. Deeper. Catherine would have loved it out here. I think about that often. My daughter, Melissa, lives in Sherwood Park with her husband, Damien. They've been married 4 years. I'll be honest with you. I never warmed to Damien the way a father probably should. He's not a bad person. Exactly. He's the kind of man who talks a lot about things he hasn't done and is genuinely surprised when reality doesn't cooperate with his plans. He'd had 3 different jobs in 4 years of marriage. Sales, then some kind of app startup that dissolved quietly, then back to sales. Melissa earns good money as a dental hygienist. She's steady, practical. She got that from Catherine. I used to worry about their dynamic, but Melissa's an adult and it's not my place. I'd say my piece when she asked, which wasn't often, and otherwise I kept the dock lights on and the room made up and loved having her over on long weekends. That was our rhythm. It worked. Then came the dinner in early April. Melissa called on a Thursday and asked if they could come up for the weekend. Of course, I said. I drove into Stony Plain on Friday afternoon and picked up groceries. A proper leg of lamb, baby potatoes, the good sourdough from the Ukrainian bakery Melissa likes. I set the table with the actual plates, not the everyday ones. I was happy. I genuinely was. They arrived Saturday afternoon, and things felt fine at first. We walked the property. Damien admired the dock with the particular enthusiasm of a man admiring something he'll never build himself. Melissa helped me prep dinner, and we talked about nothing important. Her patience, a show she'd been watching, whether the pike had been running. Normal. Good. It was after dinner, when I'd poured the last of a Malbec, that Damien leaned back in his chair the way he does when he's about to say something he's already decided on. So, he said, we've been thinking about a transition for my parents. I looked at Melissa. She was looking at her glass. I said, what kind of transition? They're in a tough spot financially, he said. My dad's CPP doesn't stretch as far as it used to, and their lease is up at the end of May. We'd love to have them with us, but honestly, our place in Sherwood Park doesn't have the space. He paused. You've got 3 bedrooms here, and you're only using 1. The silence that followed felt very long. You're suggesting your parents move into my house, I said. Temporarily, Melissa said quickly. She was still not meeting my eyes. Just until they get sorted. I asked what sorted meant. Damien said maybe 3 or 4 months, tops. I asked if his parents knew about this conversation. He said they were very open to it. He said it like that was the same as my agreeing to it. I didn't say yes. I want to be clear about that. I said I'd think about it. And Damien must have heard that as a yes, because he spent the next 40 minutes describing how his parents could use the guest room and the 3rd bedroom as a small sitting room, and how it would really be no disruption at all. I drove them out Sunday morning and stood on the dock for a long time after their taillights disappeared. His parents were Barb and Clifton. Damien's mother, Barb, was 71, loud, opinionated, with a particular talent for making her opinions sound like advice. Clifton was quieter, mostly a follower, happy to agree with whatever Barb had decided. I'd met them twice, once at the wedding, once at a Christmas dinner 2 years ago. Both times Barb had found ways to comment on how Catherine had decorated and raised Melissa. Small comments, the kind you can't quite call out directly. The following week, I called Melissa and said I hadn't agreed to anything, and that I was uncomfortable with the whole arrangement. She got quiet in that way that used to mean she was about to cry as a teenager. She said she understood, but that she didn't know what else to do. She said Damien was really stressed. She said his parents were really worried. I said, Melissa, this is my home. I live here alone, having two strangers, and I say that with respect. Move in indefinitely is not a small thing. She said, Dad, they're not strangers, they're family. And there it was, that word. That sleight of hand where family becomes the reason your boundaries stop mattering. I didn't agree that call either, but I felt something shift in me. Not toward saying yes, I want to be absolutely precise about this, but towards something more careful, something deliberate. I called my friend Hugh, who'd been a property lawyer in Calgary before he retired and moved to Sylvan Lake. We'd been friends since our 30s, hockey and fishing, and the occasional bad decision. I told him the whole story. Hugh was quiet for a moment, then said, Eric, if you let them in the door without documentation, you could have a serious problem. He explained the basics of Alberta tenancy law. Once someone has established residency, and 6 weeks can qualify, eviction becomes a formal legal process. Forms, notice periods, hearings, even family, even informal arrangements, even in your own house. I thanked Hugh and spent a week thinking. Here's what I decided. If they came, and I was beginning to understand they probably would, because Melissa would eventually wear me down and I would do it for her even though I didn't want to, then I was going to document everything. Not in a paranoid way, in a precise way. I had a home security system already, 2 cameras at the exterior doors. I added 2 interior ones. One in the main living area, one at the entrance to the hallway. I framed them as smart home upgrades. I installed them myself on a Wednesday afternoon, tested the angles, connected them to my phone. I also drafted a document. Not a formal legal contract. I ran it past Hugh first, but a clear, plain language letter of agreement. Temporary guest arrangement, I called it. Maximum 90 days. House rules. My space. No alterations to furniture or decor without discussion. No guests of their own without prior notice. Departure date in writing. I printed 2 copies, signed mine, and put them in a folder. When Melissa called the following Sunday to ask if I'd thought more about it, I said yes. I said they could come for a trial period. I said I had some paperwork I'd need them to sign first. She hesitated. I could hear her relaying this to Damien in a half-whisper. Then she said, Dad, why would there be paperwork? It's family. I said, because this is my home, and I want everyone to be clear on expectations. It's to protect all of us. Damien got on the line then. He said the paperwork seemed excessive. I said it wasn't negotiable. There was a long pause, and then he said they'd talk about it. They did not, as it turned out, sign the agreement. But they came anyway. Barb and Clifton arrived on a Thursday in mid-May, with Damien and Melissa driving the moving truck. I used the word moving truck deliberately. It was not a weekend's worth of bags. It was a 16-footer from U-Haul, stacked with furniture, boxes, a full kitchenette's worth of appliances. Barb walked into my front hall and her first words were, Oh, we'll need to rearrange this area. The energy's all wrong. I looked at Melissa. She smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. By the time Damien and Melissa left that evening, 2 things had already happened that I'd said weren't to happen. The large armchair I keep by the window facing the lake. Catherine's chair, which I had never moved, had been pushed against the side wall to make room for a settee from Barb's old living room, and there was a new scatter rug in the hallway covering the original hardwood. I moved the chair back that night. I folded the rug and put it in the closet. Barb mentioned it the next morning over coffee. I put that chair over there because it has a much better view of the TV, she said. I know, I said. I moved it back. She looked at me for a moment. Well, Clifton and I spend a lot of time in this room. It would really be more comfortable for us. It's staying where it is, I said. Not unkindly, just clearly. It's not moving. She smiled with her mouth. Of course. I could see the recalibration happening behind her eyes. She'd expected softer ground and found something else. The chair stayed. But I noticed things begin to escalate in smaller ways. Barb started keeping a list on the refrigerator. her grocery preferences, specific brands, and a note that said, "No strong fish smell when cooking." This was, I should mention, a lake house. I had been pan-frying pickerel on that stove for 4 years. I took the list down. It went back up. I took it down again and didn't mention it. She reorganized the bathroom cupboard so that her things were at the front. I reorganized it back. She started buying groceries and then mentioning, with great casualness, how much everything cost now, particularly protein. I thanked her and changed nothing about my own shopping habits. 3 weeks in, I heard her on the phone. She was sitting on the deck and didn't realize the kitchen window was open, saying something like, "Well, if we got Damien to put his name on it somehow, we wouldn't have this problem." I stopped what I was doing and stood very still. I couldn't hear enough to know exactly what she meant, but I knew the tone. I'd heard that tone in 30 years of insurance work. It's the tone of someone who has identified an asset they'd like to acquire and is working out logistics. I checked my cameras that night and clipped a few recordings. I called Hugh. I told him what I'd heard. He said, "Eric, do nothing overtly. Document everything. And I want you to call a notary Monday and make absolutely sure your deed and beneficiaries are watertight. No ambiguity anywhere." I did exactly that. Meanwhile, Melissa started calling more. Not social calls, strategic ones. Checking in on how things were going. Asking if Barb and Clifton seemed comfortable. Once she said, almost in passing, that Damien had mentioned something about maybe eventually having their names on the property as a kind of security arrangement, just in case something happened to me. I told her calmly that that wasn't something I'd entertain. She said, "Dad, he just worries about you." I said, "I'm 58, Melissa, I'm not infirm." After I hung up, I poured a glass of scotch and sat in Catherine's chair and looked at the lake for a while. Week 5. The request came formally, or as formally as Damien managed anything. He came alone on a Saturday while Melissa was working, which told me he'd planned it that way. We sat at the kitchen table, and he laid it out. Barb and Clifton weren't just getting sorted. They needed a real plan, and would I consider a long-term arrangement, perhaps with some kind of formal recognition in the property. He used the word recognition carefully. He didn't say deed. He didn't say ownership, but he meant both. I listened to the whole thing. I nodded at the appropriate moments. I asked a few clarifying questions, which he answered with growing confidence, probably because my tone was so measured. Then I said, "Damien, I appreciate you being direct with me. I've been documenting this whole arrangement, just so you know. Everything since they arrived. I'd like you to look at something." I pulled out my phone and showed him a specific clip. 12 seconds of Barb on the phone from the outdoor camera. You couldn't hear what she was saying, but you could see her, clear as anything, gesturing toward the house while speaking. Then I showed him a photograph I'd taken of the unsigned guest agreement I'd printed in May. Then I pulled out the letter from my notary confirming the title, beneficiary designations, and a formal note about my intention to keep this property in my name exclusively. Damien's confidence had gone out of him like air from a slow puncture. "This house is mine," I said. "Catherine and I paid for it. I live here alone. I invited your parents as guests, temporarily, as a favor to Melissa. That arrangement has a hard end date of 60 days from move-in, which puts us at the 15th of July. I'd like them to be packed and gone by that date. I'd like Melissa to hear that from me directly, not from you." He said something about being blindsided. I said he wasn't blindsided. He'd had an unsigned agreement sitting in front of him for weeks. He left not long after without lunch. I called Melissa that evening. I told her calmly and clearly what I'd told Damien. There was a very long silence. Then she said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I think I let this go somewhere it shouldn't have." That was the thing I hadn't expected, that acknowledgement. I held it carefully. "I know you love him," I said. "I know you were trying to help his family. But this is my home. Your mother and I worked for it, and I need it to stay mine." Melissa cried a little. I didn't try to talk her out of it. Sometimes crying is just the correct response. Barb did not take the news gracefully. There were 2 days of pointed silences, and one evening, where she managed to bring up my solitude at dinner in a way that was clearly meant to imply I was ungrateful for the company. Clifton mostly looked at his plate. On the 4th day, she stopped speaking to me directly and routed everything through Clifton, which was actually much quieter. The 15th of July, they were gone. Damien rented a U-Haul again, a smaller one this time, and they loaded up in a single morning. Barb didn't say goodbye. Clifton shook my hand at the door, a firm, dry handshake, and said, "You've got a good place here." I said thank you and meant it. Melissa came the following weekend alone. We took the canoe out in the morning and didn't talk about any of it for the first hour. Then she said, "I should have read the room sooner, Dad. I knew what Barb was like. I didn't want to admit what was happening." I said, "You were stuck between people you love. That's a hard place to be. You're being generous." "A little," I agreed. She laughed, and it sounded like her real laugh, the one from when she was 12, and for a moment the lake was very quiet around us. I've thought a lot since then about that question people keep asking. Why didn't you just say no at the start? And the honest answer is this. I did say no. I said it 3 or 4 times. The problem wasn't that I failed to say it. The problem was that certain people hear no and begin immediately calculating how to renegotiate it. When you're dealing with that kind of person, words alone aren't enough. You need something they can't negotiate with. For me, that was paper, timestamps, a notarized deed, 12 seconds of camera footage, not because I wanted a confrontation, but because I'd learned, somewhere along the way, that a boundary you can't enforce is just a suggestion. And my home has never been a suggestion. The chair is back by the window. The lake is still out there, and the dock lights are on every night, just like they've always been. One of them for me, and one of them still, in a quiet way, for Catherine.